we're the largest club on campus, College Republicans. College Democrats ceased to exist and were only put back together again by the Carter people who ran it as a. They were the Jimmy Carter people. They set up a College Democrats in order to then have the College Democrats endorse Carter. So it was a faux Democrat club. No, there were lots of interesting left-wing people. I worked on the student newspaper, the Harvard Crimson, which was objectively left of center.
That always surprised me.
Did I work there?
No, that
Or
you were
was
an
left
editor.
of center.
Yeah, no.
Oh, no. Everybody's an editor.
Oh, okay.
Literally, no. You're not the editor. You're an editor.
An editor. Okay.
Everybody in the place was an editor. I mostly
participation trophies. Yes.
I mostly worked on the business side. I wrote the worst sports story in the history of mankind because I'd never actually read one, and they sent me out to cover a baseball game. The first ball was a strike. Second ball was pitch was a ball. That's yeah. But it was all there. So when I gave it to an editor, and I said, Harvard loses, Yale gets more points than Harvard, 3-2 or something. He goes, Harvard scratches. He turned it into it. But I didn't know what I was doing. But I did. I can't take notes. I took notes. But I did have a page one right-hand corner about somebody not getting tenure, which was a big deal. Which was fun. But that was very left-wing, the publication. They were explicitly socialist, not
And
liberal
did you
Democrats.
work for this thing called the Chronicle?
There were several. There was I worked for all of them. The Crimson was the sort of the big student paper, several thousand copies. Then the Independent was the one that was sort of set up to be a counter to the Crimson back after the 60s. And the Independent was more boring and just gave you general information. And the Chronicle, was that the Libertarian one?
I don't know.
There was a Libertarian publication.
I think that was
the Harvard Libertarian Association, which used to be Sons of Liberty until we elected a lady president, and she said, "Could we be the Sons?"
So went back to Sons of Liberty. That sounds much better.
Well, she wanted to be Harvard Libertarian Association. She was going through a feminist phase, and so we were the Harvard Libertarian Association. And then there was another one, which was the Randians, and that was a Harvard. They had their own Ergo.
Yeah.
Ergo, not ego. Ergo. Harvard and MIT.
That's not the impression I get from Harvard. You have all these people who actually think independently, and they're not buying the liberal line there.
I think if you're looking to send someone to like an Ivy League school, Harvard, because it's in a big city, and it bleeds into Cambridge and Boston. Yeah. You go to Dartmouth, you're all around, and all those social engineers that don't, they decide we don't like drinking or we don't like fraternities and stuff like that. So the university's constantly trying to mold the student body, and because they're embarrassed that it looks too much like a 1950s frat house, like Animal House. And the writer of Animal House, when asked, said, yes, Dartmouth, that was the model. This kills the progressive professors and so on who want to be taken seriously, and the kids evidently aren't. But you're off, not quite Burning Man territory, but you're not near a big city. There's the campus, and that's it, right? And at Yale, you're in the middle of a more dangerous city, so you don't go out at night. But so you're also like Dartmouth, you're enclosed.
So Harvard, you're not cloistered.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It's much more. I mean, I worked with the Republican Party in Massachusetts on a regular basis.
Both of them?
Yeah, that's right. Well, we also had the sheriff of Middlesex County, Buckley, who was in favor of legalizing heroin, 1975. And he was sort of this odd duck Rockefeller Republican sheriff.
Oh, okay.
But he was like the one elected Republican. Everybody said, you must come speak to our groups and stuff. But it was, you were always 1 foot in the campus, 1 foot, because you went outside your dorm or outside the school, and there were real live people walking up and down the streets with real live jobs looking normal, and it wasn't just a bunch of kids. I think it's a bad idea to have everybody the same age, because you don't learn anything. Older people are smarter than you are. They know more. That's also the difference between Burning Man is older than Woodstock. Burning Man is the week school starts. And some people said, I'm hearing this from the guys who founded it, we thought about moving it so that the art students could come. It'd be really cool if you went to the 10 major art schools in the West and said, come do a sculpture or an artwork and we'll put it up front and you have a camp and you know, that would be very interesting. You get the architect, you really want the architecture and the art students together. And I said yes, not I said, people said yeah, and USC, University of Southern California, would show up and they turn the whole thing into a frat party. So whether they thought it through at the beginning or just there was serendipity and they were, no, they've never moved it. It's not full of college students. There are young people there. There are some people who may be going to school a week later, but it's not an entire fraternity showing up and building a camp. There's no concentration of 18-year-olds.
Let's start on the present now.
Sure.
This has been fascinating. I know Don's
This
really
is the
loving
future
this.
we're talking about.
Okay.
Burning
Why are you here?
Man. Was over meeting with a bunch of state legislators yesterday. Did a lunch. I guess we had 32 sandwiches eaten anyway. Somebody came in and took one and left, but I think so 31. Oh yeah, gone. Just talking about what's happening both in West Virginia and nationally. Short story on nationally. As long as Obama's president, he would veto anything useful the Republican House could pass, and if we get a Republican Senate in the fall, which looks good, thank you, West Virginia, for contributing to this effort. I'm from Massachusetts, I am not contributing anything to this effort. But it looks good for picking up a good majority in the Senate. But a Republican House and Senate, you can pass a few things and get some pitches in that Obama can't stop, but not much, nothing big. And anybody there, if Ted Cruz goes, now we eliminate Obamacare. Ted, he still has the veto. Not yet. I mean, all in favor of passing it, making him vetoing it, and move on, but you don't beat your head against the wall until he agrees to sign something that he's not going to sign.
But you still have to do it.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No, you do. Because you don't want anybody, don't they want, yes. We want to abolish it
veto it.
and let him veto it. Oh, and they'll be serious. I think they'll pass the Ryan budget plan, and he'll veto it. Okay. Because what you want to do is signal, if you elect a president, that's where we're going. And we'll pass not just the hard issues, getting rid of Obamacare, well, what are you going to do? The pushback. But the easy ones, where we've been passing all these laws, there are 40, 50 laws, the House has passed, the Senate's never picked up, all of which create jobs. Saying, if you've got a bridge and you want to rebuild it because it's falling down, you don't have to ask the EPA to come check it again, because you already got permission. There are no furbished outwards, living in the area. And that saves a huge amount of time and a bunch of money, but a lot of time, right? And the Democrats don't want to do that. They're dead set. I mean, even the most, you'd think the Democrats would have come up with, some things where they could, you went a little too far, you pull it back, and then you spend half your time undoing the problems you passed, and then people go, oh, how reasonable you are. But they don't do that either. They have Romney's, no apologies, never apologize, never back up. They never learn. What is this? But no apologies. We're not going to. We did it. It must be right. So all of that stuff, we are going to force the Democratic House members, the Democratic senators, and the Democratic president to vote against and veto 100 mind-bogglingly obvious, simple, good ideas. Where you can explain to somebody, why, couldn't we speed up some of these permits to create X number of jobs? Couldn't we build the pipeline through Nebraska that everybody agrees we want? And how about if we gave states more authority to do this, that, or the other thing? There's just a whole list of things, many of which the House has already passed. Flexibility to allow people, instead of taking time and a half, to take time off. A lot of people in the workforce are like, I don't want time and a half when I work extra. I want to be able to take an hour off at my choosing. Particularly women in the workforce would like more flexibility on time. And labor union rules don't allow that, and the federal law doesn't allow that. And so those sorts of things we can have a lot of fun with, and we are going to, we're going to make the left, Democrats in the House and Senate, and the president vote on or veto amazingly obvious things. And nobody's going to be, you mean they're, teachers who eat small children can be fired regardless of what the unions think. No, we can't do that. I mean, the D's are going to have to bear their fangs. in a way that Reed, remember they didn't do budgets for 5 years in a row?
Yeah.
Right, and they weren't willing to do a budget because they knew, that, and the Reed was able to save his Senate twice by not allowing his guys to ever vote on anything that showed who they were.
Yeah.
And the establishment press never pressed on that.
Yeah.
Excuse me, you didn't do a budget. You know, if the local press had beat up on, imagine if the Republicans did that, the local left-wing press would beat up on the Republican senator like it was his personal fault that there wasn't a Republican budget, that he would go to the leadership and say,
Yeah.
they're eating me, we gotta do this. None of that happened. I've seen that nowhere, any pressure on any of the Ds to even do a budget. That's not get it passed, that's write it.
Yeah.
You know? So that's the next 2 years. And if we elect a Republican president, then you pass the Ryan budget plan, and which takes us from 20% of GDP spending right now, which would normally go to 50, to 40% in the next 50 years, instead leaves it at 20. Okay, so that the government doesn't grow as a
But you're not
percentage
shrinking
of
it to
GDP.
bathroom tub size.
Um,
You're leaving it like it's
this
going
is
to be a pond.
This is the first month. This is the first month. Give us.
This is the first one. Okay.
First month. We passed Ryan, and we can go more and better than that over time.
So
but
it's not the final.
no, it's the big thing you
Never
do
comes.
to stop us from crashing. The left has set up a situation with these Ponzi scheme entitlements, and by that I mean entitlements that only work if you're constantly having more kids and everybody cheerfully dies at 67. You know, as soon as people start living longer and having fewer kids, the whole system doesn't do what it was supposed to do. And then because the government runs it, it tends not to be as advertised. And that everybody knows that crashes into a stone wall in X number of years. I mean, at what point the breaking point is, we don't know. Their job, they sit here like this and play chicken with us. You know, everything's going to heck. It's all going to crash. So you better give us a big tax increase, because then we could help you reform these systems. That was the promise. Now, mind you, that's what they say, but they never do it. Obama claimed during the 2011 fight that he wanted to reform entitlements and cut spending, except the Democrat senator said, we're not touching entitlements. So Obama goes, I'm for entitlements. The Democratic senator said, no entitlement reform at all. The only cuts you could have would be on discretionary spending, which can be turned around in a moment. And so there was never actually on the table a Democratic idea about reducing entitlements in favor of, with a tax increase to match. Imagine what they might want. Instead of going to 40, we'll go to 30. And we'll take taxes from 20% of GDP up to 30, and spending from 20 up to 30. But the compromise is it didn't go to 40. So they play this game. You crash into that bridge abutment, and unless you come and give me all the stuff I want. But then at the end of the day, they've never actually proffered a solution. They hoping to wait till we get closer. Similarly, the president on tax reform, for 6 years he said he knows the importance of tax reform. He knows our corporate rate's 35, the European average is 25, and all these inversions that happen are happening now because after 6 years people said he's really never going to fix this. He's never going to fix this. We can't be competitive in a world where our tax rate is 10% higher than the German companies.
Yeah.
And so they allowed this crisis to happen because they believed that Republicans would come to them and take the following deal. We take the 35 to maybe 30. We eliminate a lot of deductions and credits, and to sort of revenue neutral, and then we add $1 trillion to $1.4 trillion tax increase net. Every time they've asked for a reform, or said that they were for a reform, it was actually inside the life is a box of chocolates. You don't know what's inside. Okay, you do know what's inside these guys' proposal. It's $1 trillion to $1.4 trillion over a decade tax hike. I talked to now Secretary of State Kerry, then Senator. At the time, 2011 fall, he was the head of the super committee, the head Democrat on the super committee, 12 guys who were supposed to come up with an alternative to the sequester. Now, I like the sequester just fine. I think it's great. But they were supposed to come up with a different thing for the sequester. And he said, Grover, I really need your help. You know, your wife and my wife, they should have coffee soon. Yes, sir. What do you want? Well, I think we're really close. What is it you want? Well, just $1.4 trillion in higher taxes over the decade. I thought we were solving a $1.2 trillion deficit problem. Why 1.4? Oh, because Obama wants to spend another $400 billion on stimulus 3.0. Remember, there was 800 and then another 400 he wanted. And there's 200 billion in spending cuts we all agree on. So taxes up 1.4, total spending up 200 billion, up 4, down 2. And I was so taken aback by the 1.4 trillion in tax increases, I forgot to ask, what are the 200 billion in spending increase cuts that we all agree on? I'd love to focus on that. Nobody told me there was 200 billion, 20 billion a year for 10 years, of spending cuts that we all agree on that are obvious. Couldn't we do those now or 10 years ago? What's this? So what they wanted, when you hear people say, well, 3-to-1 ratio or 4-to-1 ratio, that would be good. They were not offering any ratio. Or remember, they had all the members, people running for president. Well, you've signed Americans for Tax Reform Pledge never to raise taxes. What if you were offered $10 of spending cuts for $1 of tax increase? Would you take that? Everyone said no. Okay. And the press said, oh, that's crazy. Well, one, nobody's ever offered you one for 10. And two, if they did offer you one for 10, it would be the beginning of a negotiation, which would end up with all tax increases and no spending cuts.
Yeah.
And we know this from personal experience because Kerry, with his back to the wall, trying to cut a deal where if he didn't get what he wanted, it was all spending cuts. If Kerry didn't come up with an alternative, he could sell Congress, all spending cuts. So he had every incentive to come up with a reasonable, if they'd done 10-to-1, they'd have broken our phalanx against tax increases. Right? But they couldn't, they wouldn't. They have no ability or appetite to cut spending, period. So even this, well, maybe we could compromise at 30. That's not their position. It's the position of a smart guy like Clinton, but he's not running the show. Those guys just have no ability to give anything because their constituents want the money.
You mentioned Clinton. He was, well, let's see, Dukakis was a governor.
Yeah.
But and Carter was governor. But they usually go with the senator. He had to deal with like you do here, the state, and you have to make these compromises and cut these deals. Do you miss Clinton? I mean, it seems like he completed the Reagan welfare reform and balancing the budget.
Clinton was a very interesting character. He compartmentalized, as they say, Monica Lewinsky over here, other stuff over here. It didn't compartmentalize. That's total denial. It wasn't like he was, sometimes focused on the Monica Lewinsky scandal and sometimes on the other. It's not compartmentalization. He compartmentalized the way schizophrenics compartmentalize.
Yeah.
I'm one thing to you, and I'm something else to you, and I'm something else to you. And so lots of people I know just think the world of him, because when he talks to them, he's just lying the whole time.
He did get the budget balanced.
Oh.
I'll grant you that. It took Gingrich and a shotgun, but...
Yeah, two things. Stock market for the first 2 years of his presidency, Republicans take the House and Senate stock market for the last 6 years, okay? Similarly, the deficit projections, remember he raised taxes.
Yeah.
He was projecting, after the tax increase, deficits of $200 billion a year as far as the eye could see. Why?
The good old
because
days.
he was just going to keep, he was spending every dollar of that tax cut. That tax cut had nothing to do with spending. Republicans come in, put the clamps on domestic discretionary spending.
Yeah.
Clamps meaning slow it a little bit, and cut the capital gains tax. Tremendous increase in revenue, slower growth in spending. Gingrich came in and said, we've just passed a constitutional amendment to balance the budget in 6 years. So 6 years. But we passed it in the House. But eventually we want the Senate to pass it. So we now have to draw a budget to balance in 7, because it'll take us a year to get it through the state. So balance in 7. If you're not with me, I'm going to quit. So all of the House guys, he did what the Tea Party guys had to put 1 million people in the streets to do. Everyone in the House goes, we have to have that much fiscal discipline? And they all said, okay. Because he was the guy who brought him to the majority. This was literally in the first few months. 2 years later, nobody was listening to him, and all hell broke loose. Nobody ran around crazy. And he wasn't always being as disciplined 2 years later as he was here. But here, he basically said, I know you guys signed on for 100 days. It's now a 7-year march of fiscal discipline. And committee chairman, they did. That's when they did freedom to farm, phasing out the farm subsidies and everything else. I mean, just all sorts of huge reforms got done. Now, they weren't all signed by Obama, but he vetoed it a couple of times. But then, like with welfare reform,
shut down the thing twice.
He did sign stuff over time. We beat him on a lot of things. But had he had a Democrat Congress, he'd have been Obama.
Yeah. I always thought that.
Run that by me. He would have been Obama?
He would have been Obama as a spender and a taxer, yeah. He had no governor to stop him from taxing and spending. Obama doesn't. Obama's much more of an ideologue. Clinton plays to his necessary audience. The necessary audience would have been a Democrats. And then as soon as he got into Monica Lewinsky trouble, the necessary audience was the Democrats to keep from getting impeached. He had to hold the Democrats. That's when he ended all efforts to get free trade around the globe, because the unions wouldn't take it anymore. He was a free trader. He passed free trade. NAFTA, right? That happened under his watch. It was put together by Reagan and then Bush, and then he signed it into being. He could have done the Doha round. We could have had international free trade toward the end of his term. The Republicans would have cheerfully voted for it. But he killed it when they had the riots in Washington State. And because he wasn't his own player, he was owned by the unions and the trial lawyers and all the interests of the Democratic Party. There was a period in between before he got in trouble. It wasn't completely true. He was still leader of the band. But he couldn't. He was talking to the Republicans about personalizing Social Security and reforming Medicare and all these things. Had he decided to do that, we could have passed all that stuff in the last 4 years of the administration with only Republican votes to speak of.
But the impeachment sort of split. I mean, Gingrich and
the Republicans couldn't. They were so mad at him they couldn't see straight. And instead of using his problems to say, "We'll never talk about those as long as this happens," we had a Republican governor, and I'll give the state because we're on TV. But we had a Republican governor who was very good on a certain tax and spending issue, and then he had an affair that got found out about by the press, and the press came in and said, unless you break on this tax and spending issue, we're going to print about the girlfriend, and they cut a deal transactionally, and taxes went up, spending went up, girlfriend never got mentioned. Ours should have not focused on Monica Lewinsky. It was a distraction from winning issues we had. I understand the temptation. You're just so livid at the guy because he's so disingenuous. Gingrich would take one of those walks in the morning down the mall, and Gingrich says, Army's the one guy. We all go meet with the White House, and Clinton talks and talks, and I'm convinced he's being serious and really offering something, and on the way back, the only guy in the car who is Army goes, he's just lying the whole time. He doesn't mean a word of it. It takes the rest of us a little while to decompress and go, okay, yeah, he was. Because they're going, oh, he said he wanted to do this, and maybe he wants to do this. And Gingrich would tell me at other times when doing these walk things, why he was quoting some German guy here and there, and yeah, he was talking to you. He didn't actually agree to anything. He was interesting to chat with. So are other people. Yeah. It was like this, Ulysses and the Sirens, right?
It's just charming.
Just chain yourself to that thing like Army did. I'm not listening. I hear nothing. I am not walking into those rocks.
The Family Guy episode, you've seen that?
No.
Oh, I don't want to say it on the phone.
I want to ask this. I'm relatively new to the newspaper business, but I've been following news. Although not living and breathing, I've been raising family and just working. But
it's normal.
Yeah, but and all of a sudden I start reading Grover Norquist says this, Grover Norquist says this, and I kept saying, who's Grover Norquist? I mean, it's like everybody knows. So tell me, who are you?
Well, I grew up in Massachusetts prior to emigrating to the United States.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I haven't looked it up. I mean, so I know.
Yeah.
But just tell me, who are you? You think?
I was an anti-communist first. And then later became an economic conservative. But that was I grew up in Vietnam.
Uh-huh.
I was 12 and following politics at not 18. So I was very political when I was 12. My local public library got rid of all the right-wing books by Hoover, and I Led Three Lives by Herb Philbrick. And so I read all the anti-communist stuff for a nickel each in my basement one summer. So I had a bunch of really good collection of stuff that the library considered unnecessary anymore. Herb Philbrick used to have communist cell meetings in my hometown down the street. I grew up on Liberal Hill, also known as Red Hill, back in the 1950s, and just outside of Boston. Went to Harvard, but I was always sort of became free market. I mean, I knew I didn't like the Soviet Union, and then later I realized our government was an improvement, but not necessarily everything we needed either. So came down, ran the National Taxpayers Union for about a year, right out of college. A friend of mine got me a job as associate director, and then the guy moved on, and this was right in the middle of Prop 13. So just as I'm sure Proposition 13 is passing in California, I fly to 18 states. I'm 17, 18 years old, and talking to Time magazine, and they're going, why do they care what I think? Well, I think this. Okay, but I did run a taxpayer group. This is true. So so I was executive director, and we got a lot of states passed, and we worked in a lot of different states on tax restraints, spending limitations, tax cuts on the ballot. And then Proposition 2.5, which was like California's Prop 13 in Massachusetts in '80. Worked on the '80 campaign instead of like concentrating on the school, and came down in '81 and did political work with the Republicans, Chamber of Commerce. Reagan asked me to set up they set up Americans for Tax Reform. They asked me to run it, and it was like organizing for Obama, the Organizing for America, the Obama C4 outside group. So we were the outside group for the tax reform measure of '86. And we set it up, and then during it I created the Taxpayer Protection Pledge because we had Republicans going, I'm worried about taking rates down and broadening the base because I worry rates will just drift up and we won't even have the deductions and credits to protect people anymore. So I said, okay, here's a pledge people can make. No raising rates ever. So anything we get down holds. And if you want to go after eliminating deductions and credits, the rates have to come down again too. So it's no raising taxes by eliminating deductions and credits. And the left always interpreted that to mean taking the capital gains rate up to the normal rate. They considered that a tax break. So 100 congressmen signed it, 20 senators. It was very big in helping to pass tax reform, then helped in the '86 election. The Democrats sued me, the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee sued me for making illegal campaign contributions to Republicans. Well, I didn't make any contributions to anybody. What are we talking about? Well, you said that person's taken the pledge. Well, yes. Well, everybody knows that's the right answer. So that's an endorsement, saying that guy won't raise your taxes. That's an endorsement, because everybody knows it's the right answer. If everyone knows it's the right answer, could you go talk to your congressional candidates and work on them? Anyway, we won the court case or whatever it is, the regulatory thing. But it was fascinating that they went after us hard in '86 because they thought this is not going to be good. And they were right. Then everybody took the pledge except Dole in '88, and just before the New Hampshire primary, Pete DuPont handed Dole the pledge, said, we've all signed the pledge, what about you? And he acted, he did this sort of thing like this, like he's a vampire and somebody tossed a cross in his lap. Oh, what's this? But in New Hampshire, they have something called the pledge. It's the no income tax, no sales tax pledge. And I think being from Massachusetts, I probably got the word pledge from the New Hampshire pledge. Now ours was a bit different, but it was a instead of going commitment or promise or something, pledge. So everybody in New Hampshire knew what the pledge was. It's not raising taxes. So I'm not sure that would have worked in other states yet. It wasn't known nationally, but in New Hampshire it was, and it sunk Dole.
Yeah.
And Bush won. Then Bush says, read my lips, no new taxes, and then 2 years later he raises taxes in '90. remember Reagan, they said $3 of spending cuts for $1 of tax increase, and the tax increases were real, permanent, and the spending cuts never happened. Not all of them didn't happen, none of them happened. Because they weren't in entitlement reform. They were all in promises of discretionary spending. So we promise that the Appropriations Committee will spend less. Oh, really? Yeah, they did. And everyone acted like they'd done something. Then, I mean, I was disappointed Reagan got snookered, but the House was against him and Dole's Senate was against him, so he was really against the wall. And then they went to Bush, who'd watched that happen, and they offered him $2 of imaginary spending cuts for every dollar of tax increase. And you got tax increases, and spending went up more than before, not less, more. And so he got took, and to this day, you'll hear him every once in a while. Sometimes he whines at me personally. But he'll go, well, we had to do that tax increase to save the budget. Your tax increase increased spending and increased the deficit. It didn't do any of the things you said it did. And he doesn't know that. He doesn't know that. I don't think he's lying. He doesn't know that. I passed this to do X. X should have happened. Right? You're supposed to judge me based on my intentions.
You helped engineer the Gingrich Revolution with the Contract for America and all that. We would like one here in West Virginia, and you've met some West Virginians recently. What do you think our state is, from what you can tell as an outsider? Where do you think our state is? Is there a possibility of taking over the House after
I think
83 years?
Yeah. I think the House, and this is, I've asked a bunch of guys who are working on this. I got whole ranges. I think the House flips, and I'm told between 2 and 6 Democrats will change parties if the Republicans have a majority after the election. Some people take 2 to 4, some people say 4 to 6, but between 2 and 6 is the range of Democrats who'll come over. Part of that may be whether you beat some of the 6, but others may be how scared they are or how confident you are that the majority holds going forward.
And you get a committee chairmanship out of the deal, sure.
Yeah, and so I think the House looks very good. The Senate is not impossible. It's tough to do. The reason it's not impossible is because Cole's very hardworking, and they picked lots of very good candidates. You guys have good House and Senate candidates this time. No witches.
What should the Republicans do assuming Tim Armstead becomes the Speaker? What should they do? Should they work with the Democrats to make some changes, or should?
I think you do both. When you're in politics, you need to have bifocal vision. You need to focus on where you're trying to get to. We're trying to get to the mountains, but you have to look at your feet so you don't trip. So you have to constantly do both. And same thing in legislation. You pass those bills that you have to because you have a Democrat governor and there's certain limitation on what you can do. But I think you also want to pass bills and introduce bills that say, that's where we're going. Governor won't help us, but that's where we're going. And you need to be able to go back and forth between those. I saw Gingrich get in trouble because he was looking at the mountains and talking about that, and then he gets into office, he's okay, now this week we're going to do this, and people, no, what about mountains? We're going to the mountains, but first, we're walking to the mountains, and every step in the right direction is a baby step, but you're right, yes, we're going to the mountains. And so bifocal vision and bifocal communication. You've got to say to people, we are going to the mountains, and today's project to get us to the mountains is to take these 3 steps forward. The reason why we can't go further right now is because we have a Democrat governor or a Democrat president or a Democrat Senate, and that's why we can only go this far. But our goal is there, and here's what we're. So you got to have this.
Yeah.
You got to. Gingrich thought, well, I'll go talk to the people after, for the next election, and he's just talking to these guys, and these people hear the chatter. You talk to the Washington press.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can do a half an inch this week, and we're trying to do this, and we can't do more.
Mm-hmm.
Look, can't do more because the president would veto it. Okay?
Yeah.
But people think if you don't do it, you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
You've got to have when you talk in Washington, even before Twitter, there were state press people hearing what you said to the Washington Post, and it gets out to the country that you're only doing this instead of that. And so you've got to have this constant conversation. We want to go there. We're trying to go there. Here's what we can get right now. Got it? Okay. And so that there's this understanding, and you know, because the establishment press will go, well, you're talking about the mountains for you. The president has a veto, and they would literally not listen to any conversation that wasn't, tell me things you're going to do that Clinton would sign. We're not hearing you on anything else.
Yeah.
And when he would pass something and want them to publicize it, like we'd pass the abolition of the death tax, well, he's not going to sign it, so it's not news. Now, so if there are other avenues, other publications, other ways to communicate with people, you need to be constantly talking to people, particularly if you only get halfway to the mountains. You don't have the governorship, or you don't have the Senate yet, or you need to be able to, here's what we're doing to make some progress. Why was it worthwhile to elect us? Because we did this. We got some stuff. We drew some blood. But we're going there, and here's what we're doing. And that's very difficult to, because sometimes Bob Dole used to do this thing where he'd go from being a participant to doing color commentary, on his own stuff. Well, we don't have the votes to do that. Can you imagine the guys in the shootouts out west? Well, I don't seem to have any more bullets. You have to tell the other team that,
I'm not putting any boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, right. Dole would step out of himself and then give you his analysis of the state of play between the two. And which is fascinating for the press to hear, but communicated out to the voters, they go, well, where are you? Are you the neutral guy in the middle, or are you our hero?
Yeah.
Are you our champion?
Yes.
Are you fighting for us, or are you telling us we can't have what we want?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to tell them, you can't have what you want now, or we can't achieve what we want now because they're in the way. And listen to the Democrats. They spend all their time, we can't achieve what we want because Bush was president. I mean, some of their arguments aren't as strong as they might be, but they're constantly telling their voters, some evil people are trying to thwart what we're doing, so understand I can't change the world immediately. It's going to take some time. Be calm. And you hear very little on people getting anxious that Obama's not delivered as fast as he could, even though any part of the movement might have said, hey, how come I'm not first in line? They've been fairly disciplined, and I think because they're talked to regularly.
Yeah. The gay marriage advocates, for example, didn't get on this case.
Oh, 2008, he ran against gay marriage, and nobody
cared.
Because they knew he was lying.
Didn't believe him.
Right, yes. They knew he was lying. They believed that he was lying, that they knew he was lying. Yeah.
Just a couple minutes.
Sure.
Paul says you just got a few minutes. Would you like
shut
to
up.
finalize with, or anything in particular that you really want to stress?
24 states have complete Republican governments right now, governor in both houses. Half the country lives in a state like that. 13 states, California, Illinois, Massachusetts, completely blue Democrat states, governor in both houses. You are one of the 13 right now. West Virginia is one of the 13. That looks to change in this election and upcoming elections to where you could see it'd be a red state. You have models of what works in the 24 states. A lot of those 24 states only became red recently. Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, those are states that have passed somewhat dramatic reforms, but they were Democratic House, Senate, and Governor not that long ago. And certainly Democratic House and Senate not that long ago. Even if they periodically have a Republican governor, we didn't have the legislature. North Carolina, South Carolina. Georgia, recent win in the legislature. So those are models of when you get all three, what can you do that matters? There are two mega models. Wisconsin, dramatic change in public sector labor law. Not private sector labor law, didn't touch that, just in public sector. You can be a public sector union member, but they can't withhold your dues from your check at the government school level or anywhere. They got to come and ask you for the money. 2, you don't have to give it to them. It's voluntary. Membership's voluntary. 3, unions can't negotiate on pensions. Unions can't negotiate on work rules. Unions can't negotiate on benefits. Unions can negotiate on one thing: pay increases up to the rate of inflation. So they didn't abolish unions. You can have unions. You get pay increase up to the rate of inflation. You want more than the rate of inflation, the school board can't give it to you. They have to put it on the ballot. So you're not negotiating with the school board. You're negotiating with the school board with Igor standing over here going, no. So the school board goes, no. Okay. Or if they think that everybody over here is excited about going to 3% or 5% or something, sure, onto the ballot. So they and every year, every union has to be recertified, meaning the members have to vote to continue the union's existence. If they don't, it's gone.
Did the WEA go out of business?
A whole bunch of them did. They're a bunch of locals. I think the state's still there, but hundreds? I don't know, but it's many. They're having a hard. They're not reporting this quickly.
Yeah.
Membership locals, it simply ceased to exist.
Yeah.
They've lost $60 to $100 million a year in cash flow. The unions in that state, 60 to 100 million a year. Okay, that's why they're having some trouble, beating the governor, because they got to import their resources to go after him. Now they are, because it's too important. But that's one model dramatically, because what he did it as a budget matter, not a union matter.